Here's your host for this morning's edition of America's Fabric.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Lee Valite. I'm an independent physician in private practice in Tucson and Dallas, and the author of several health books for consumers, as well as the founder of a new international medical consulting company based to help patients have access to quality medical services and medical privacy at lower cost in a variety of countries. My medical websites are www.internationalhealthstrategiesltd.com and www.herplace.com. Today, I will talk about the ways that medical treatment guidelines created by the federal government and various agencies of the government such as, for example, the FDA and NIH, may actually be jeopardizing your health and longevity, particularly if critical information from new studies is withheld or studies are not accurately or completely presented to the public and health professionals. As you listen to the examples I'm presenting today, think about how this pattern of government distortion of information and government-directed hidden agendas may actually become more dangerous to your health as we move more and more deeply into a nationalized, government-controlled medical system under ObamaCare. Think about how once government agencies like the FDA or NIH issue guidelines for the treatment of patients, they become like the Titanic, difficult to turn around in time to stop a disaster. The lack of flexibility to change government guidelines as new medical data becomes available through research means you may get out-of-date information that affects your life and survival. Let's look at a recent news report. On July 19th, 2013, FoxNews.com ran a headline, quote, "Avoiding estrogen therapy led to deaths of nearly 50,000 women, study says," end quote. Dr. Philip Sorrell and his research team from Yale University were reporting their study that showed over the last 10 years, approximately 50,000 women died prematurely from avoidance of estrogen therapy. How could this be? Well, let's look at the background. Before 2002, it was standard practice for doctors to recommend estrogen therapy for the slice of the population of women aged 50 to 59 who had had a hysterectomy. And more than 90% of women in this category used estrogen to treat symptoms such as hot flashes, vaginal dryness, to prevent osteoporosis, and to lower their risk of heart disease and memory loss. Today, in 2013, only about 10% of those women use estrogen. Why the big difference? Well, let's look at the role of the NIH and the FDA government agencies in this dramatic shift and the adverse impact on women's lives. This sharp decline in estrogen usage was linked to results from one part of the large federally funded Women's Health Initiative study released in 2002. Because of the sensational way in which Dr. Jacques Rousseau, head of NIH, presented the information in a press conference before doctors had even been allowed to see the data, Women across the country and around the world and their doctors became frightened of the reported dangers of postmenopausal hormones. But according to Dr. Sorrell and talks I've been giving myself over the last 10 years, this first report was about women with a uterus who took pills that combined horse estrogen, Premarin, and a potent synthetic progestin, Provera. It was called Prempro. Women who have a uterus have to take that second hormone to avoid a risk of uterine cancer. But these results did not apply to women with no uterus who use estrogen-only therapy. Yet the headlines screamed, "Hormones cause cancer. Hormones cause heart attacks and strokes. Hormones cause dementia. Hormones are dangerous drugs." There were over 400 newspaper articles, 2,500 radio and TV stories, more publicity for the Women's Health Initiative release than had been in the coverage of 9/11. And all of these results were reported in the media based upon information from Dr. Rousseau and his press release, using percentages, not actual numbers. But the problem is that when we use a percentage with small numbers, it's very misleading. For example, we could say Jesus Christ was betrayed by 8% of his disciples. But in fact, he was only betrayed by one person. Quite a difference in the impact. The public is confused when numbers are given in percentages, and the public at the time of this announcement about the Women's Health Initiative study did not understand that the actual numbers were very small. Let me give you some examples of how the government slanted the information that was presented to the public and unnecessarily frightened women and their doctors. In 10,000 women, there were only 19 adverse events from this study, and there was no increase in death in any of the hormone-treated groups. Compare that with another common medicine, NSAIDs, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications used for pain and arthritis and headaches and all sorts of problems. In 1 year alone, 16,500 people died of gastrointestinal complications from NSAIDs. Yet, nobody stopped using them, and they certainly didn't have a press conference with the kind of sensationalism that we saw for women with the WHI. So, in the WHI, out of 10,000 women, there were only 8 more breast cancers in the estrogen-progestin group compared to placebo. That was a 0.1% increase in risk of breast cancer per year in that combined hormone group. There were 8 more strokes, 7 more heart attacks, and 18 more blood clots out of 10,000 women. Compare these numbers, which are incredibly low, with traffic statistics. For women aged 55 to 64, the approximate younger end of the group in the study, there are 271 motor vehicle accidents per 10,000 women per year. Women are 14 times more likely to be involved in a traffic accident with injuries or death than to have adverse effects of hormones. Yet, we haven't told women to stop driving. Just going to the study site to get the pills was more risk from driving than any risk they had from taking the hormones. But then, the positive findings of the WHI hormone-treated group were downplayed as the government agency, NIH, under Dr. Rousseau, downplayed the benefits and exaggerated the risk. For example, there wasn't much press about colon cancer, but there were 6 fewer cancers in the hormone group, and this benefit was significant since colon cancer has a higher risk of death than does breast cancer. There were fewer osteoporotic fractures. Again, this is highly significant because there are millions more women with hip and spine fractures than there are breast cancer patients. And the sad part is that all of these results only referred to the estrogen progestin Prempro arm of the study, with 1 drug and 1 dose for all women. Basically, world experts have chastised our WHI investigators and our NIH government interpretation of the data for using the wrong drug at the wrong dose for the wrong patients at the wrong time in their lives for the wrong reasons, and then presenting information to the public that scared women away and their doctors away from the very real positive benefits of continuing estrogen, for example. The government guidelines downplayed the major benefits on osteoporosis. We have 3 times as many women suffering osteoporotic fractures as heart attacks. There are 6 times as many osteoporotic fractures as strokes, and 8 times as many fractures due to osteoporosis as we see with breast cancer. In addition, the 6-month death rate from hip fractures is greater than the 10-year death rate from stage 1 breast cancer. Yet the NIH researchers emphasized breast cancer and strokes and heart disease with the combined hormones and did not play up the lower risk with estrogen alone and did not emphasize reduced risk of colon and breast cancers. And then, in typical government bureaucrat distortion of the facts, the findings were generalized to all hormones, all women, at all ages. Never in my career has this been done from one study of one drug in one group of patients. Years later, it finally came out that Dr. Jacques Rousseau, head of NIH Heart Lung Blood Institute at the time, had another agenda. By discrediting the positive effects of hormone therapy to lower the risk of heart disease and emphasizing the use of statin medications, more research money on statins came into the Heart Lung Blood Institute that he directed. Now, a decade later, we see the tragic results of these rigid FDA guidelines based upon the NIH flawed reporting of the data and their clear bias in exaggerating the risk and downplaying the benefits. We still have black box warnings about estrogen that have not been updated based upon new information. For example, Kaiser Permanente reported an analysis of their data from their very large patient database showing an excess of 50,000 osteoporotic fractures per year every year for the last 10 years since women abruptly stopped using estrogen out of fear. That's 500,000 women in the U.S. alone that have suffered the pain and the immobility or early death from hip and spine fractures. Not to mention that hip and spine fractures are the leading reason women must be admitted to nursing homes and lose their independence because they are not able to move around adequately to take care of themselves. Then, in 2012, the 11-year follow-up from the Women's Health Initiative of women taking estrogen alone found marked benefits of estrogen therapy. Estrogen alone reduced the risk of heart disease 50% compared to women taking no hormones at all. Breast cancer in women taking estrogen alone was reduced 60% compared to women taking no hormones at all. And yet, that study was published in a British medical journal. The American press did not pick it up. American women and their doctors to this day still do not know this incredible data showing not only the safety, but the marked increase in benefit from estrogen alone compared to women who are taking no hormones at all. This is why I say that government guidelines may be hazardous to your life and health. I point out again, the NIH and FDA government agencies generated these guidelines from the Women's Health Initiative, and they were biased to downplay major benefits and overplay risk. The Yale researchers recently stated in the release of their new study, quote, "Distortion of details can prove to be nothing less than lethal," end quote. Dr. Sorrell further said, quote, "Estrogen avoidance has resulted in a real cost in women's lives every year for the last 10 years, and the deaths continue," end quote. We have not updated our guidelines to show these benefits. Women and their doctors are still not getting accurate, complete information to help them make informed decisions. And this is our government at work. In addition to early death, disability, and dependence for millions of women, the flawed government guidelines clearly led to higher medical costs for treatment of problems like heart attacks or hip fractures or dementia that could have been reduced or prevented with careful attention to proper dose and timing of estrogen therapy for women at risk. Millions of women around the world have lost precious quality of life or have died prematurely from heart disease, colon cancer, breast cancer, osteoporosis, and dementia as a result of the way in which this flawed study and its NIH spokespersons and FDA guidelines exaggerated the risk of hormone therapy. The resulting fear have caused millions of women to stop hormones that could have improved their quality of life and their overall health, and could have reduced medical care costs as well. We've spent the last decade with misinformation and guidelines from our government that have been misapplied and based on flawed interpretation of the data. The damage also comes to patients from the dramatic increase in other medications that women are given to treat symptoms and health risk that occur from loss of estrogen. For example, people die of nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory pain medicines. 70 to 80% of women given an SSRI or SNRI for mood or hot flashes have sexual dysfunction and over time weight gain and memory impairment. Statins have severe side effects, muscle pain and memory loss, and suppressed testosterone in men. Beta blockers for blood pressure that could have been lowered with estrogen. Actually, the beta blockers, 60 out of 10,000 have serious depression, 180 out of 10,000 have fatigue that interferes with daily life, and 50 out of 10,000 have sexual dysfunction. all of those numbers are multiple times greater than any of the risk associated with hormones. And then we have the tragedy of the overuse of unproven, unreliable, unregulated therapies with herbal products and compounded hormones that are made of formulas with excessively high doses of progesterone and testosterone and lower than needed doses of estrogen, leading to many adverse effects. And the ultimate tragedy of all is that women have lost the critical window of opportunity to preserve healthy function and get the benefits of estrogen. The conclusion in 2012 from the International Menopause Society expert panel is, quote, "Women can now be reassured that estrogen therapy is safe when started near menopause, with the potential to increase quality of life in symptomatic women and reduce their risk of future heart disease and premature death," end quote. And yet, our own government has not really revised the guidelines in ways that help women make informed decisions today. The Obamacare tsunami that hits in 2014 will be even bigger as more regulations take effect to cause more upheaval in American healthcare and increased government control of your medical records data and draconian intrusion into the most personal and private aspects of your lives. The government's thuggish tactics are the opposite of the principles of self-reliance, self-accountability, and self-determination that made America great. Is it any wonder that more than 60% of the American public is opposed to this rogue government now having control over individuals' medical records, medical treatments, and medical insurance? When others besides your physician decide what treatment you're allowed at what stage of life and how quickly you may have it, then your life is at stake. Most of us don't want limits on our medical treatment based on fuzzy science, half-baked research, flawed statistical interpretation leading to exaggerated risk, and flawed guidelines imposed by an ever-expanding government. We want physicians we trust to help us assess our individual risk and be able to make our own medical decisions. That is the concept of individual liberty to live life and pursue happiness and health on our own terms, and this is the concept that made America great. We are rapidly losing our medical freedom, along with our other freedoms being threatened by an out-of-control government. Now is the time to become active and help defeat the Medicaid expansion and single-payer government-run healthcare before even more government guidelines affect your health or cost you your life. This is Dr. Valit signing off for today. You may enjoy the articles and podcast on my website, www.herplace.com, or www.internationalhealthstrategiesltd.com. And if you'd like to keep these programs on the air, please send a contribution to the address mentioned at the end of the show. Even though America's Fabric is no longer a 501c3 program, we do need support to keep the show on the air.
You've been listening to America's Fabric, a radio series on American history and culture, broadcast every Sunday over KVOI Tucson and its affiliates. Be sure to tune in again next Sunday morning at 8. Until then, never forget, it's the courage, knowledge, hard work, and respect for truth of Americans that keeps America free and prosperous. America's Fabric is listener-supported. To make a contribution, send a check to America's Fabric, Post Office Box 17356, Tucson, Arizona, 85731. That's P.O. Box 17356, Tucson, 85731. Every contributor will be mailed a Grateful to be an American bumper sticker. To get more information on America's Fabric or to listen to previous broadcasts, go to americasfabric.com. That's americasfabric.com.